we'll take this what I'm just about to present here, that if you imagine the key words might be reenactment, feedback. I think those are the two things. This image is from Time magazine. It shows the body of a man murdered by drugs gangs. What makes it a very contemporary photograph is that the picture shows a number of other photographers taking a picture of the man's body. We do not know the fate of these pictures, but some may have been posted on the internet to become units of exchange on blogs, online communities, and chat lines. We need to lose some light, actually, maybe. Yeah. So you can see almost every person in this photograph has a camera, apart from the man lying on the floor. That information is a unit of exchange, that we ourselves are involved in an information economy, and that this economy depends a great deal on our activity as self-performing subjects, feeding back information within that economy, and this will be the basis of the talk this evening. And for reasons that I hope to make apparent, I want to call this feedback loop the social studio, taking my title from the show downstairs by Art of Re-enactment. In Psychiatric Power, lectures at the Collège de France, 1973 to 1974, Michel Foucault informs us Jeremy Bentham thought that the Panopticon apparatus could be used to construct metaphysical experiments on children. Imagine taking foundlings, he said, right from birth and putting them in the panoptic system. And if you remember, the panoptic system is a system whereby from a central tower you can view a number of cells that form a circle. So Bentham proposed raising children in different cells with different belief systems. We could teach no matter what to no matter which child, and we would see the result. In this way, we could teach children in completely different systems, or even systems incompatible with each other. Some would be taught the Newtonian system, and then others would go on to believe that the moon was made of cheese. When they are 18 or 20, they would be put together to discuss the question. We could also teach different sorts of mathematics to children, one in which 2 + 2 makes 4, and another in which they don't make 4. And then we could wait again until their 20th year, and then they would be put together for discussion. So Bentham proposing a very discursive form of containment there. Bentham's notion of a totally engineered subject and engineered society did not come out of the blue. The notion that the blank slate of the human subject could be inscribed with any number of designs had been posited by Aristotle, and the notion of the tabula rasa was revived in the Christian society by Aquinas. The figure of the foundling, the individual picked from obscure poverty or feral isolation, to be formed or reformed as an economically valuable unit, can also join the ranks of the experimental subjects in the social studio. Linnaeus introduced the term Homo ferus, that's the genus and species, Homo ferus, in his encyclopedic work System Natura in 1758, taking his cue from Rousseau. He observed how children raised by animals take on the social characteristics of their foster parents, wolves, bears, sheep, etc. It follows that if a child raised in the society of animals assumes the attributes of that society, children raised in different human societies will assume the attributes of those humans. It was in the Enlightenment, this is from Nantes Cathedral, I believe, and this is the wild man and the peasant. We were echoing each other. So it isn't only an Enlightenment conception, but it was in the Enlightenment that the notion that an individual could be fashioned reached the level of this social experiment. So it was in the Enlightenment that the notion that an individual could be fashioned reached the level of a social experiment, in which the study of a particular case, removed from its defining context, can provide insights into the operations of the general. Now, some of you may be familiar with these images. The battle for this for this concept was, in one instance, the body of Caspar Hauser, who in the early 1800s, until the age of 16, had been chained to a wall in the windowless cellar, probably near Nuremberg. Following Hauser's discovery, this child, untouched by any civilizing influences of society, was taken into the patronage of the kindly rationalist Feuerbach and subjected to an enlightened education, and was later passed on to the aristocrat Earl Stanhope, who displayed him as a remarkable instance of the civilized man, that is, the reformed man. The blank slate of Hauser, it would seem, could be inscribed with the most genteel script. The emphasis on the importance of learning runs from Bentham's Panopticon through the behaviorism of John Brodus Watson, who coined the term behaviorism that was later taken up by Skinner and others. And he proclaimed, "The time has come when psychology must discard all reference to consciousness. Its sole task is the prediction and control of behaviour. Introspection can form no part of this method. Prediction and control now became dominant figures in the social studio. The emphasis centred on performance of the organism maximised through learning." But Bentham's proposed experiment resembles the modern social psychology experiment in another key respect. It involves the containment, it involves it involves the containment of its subject within control conditions, the mise en scène of the experiment, the characteristics which were transferred effortlessly to the famous experiments of Stanley Milgram and Philip Zimbardo. This is the Zimbardo experiment. I'll very quickly explain. A group of students from Stanford University was split into designated categories, prisoners and guards. And they became prisoners and guards in a makeshift prison in Stanford University in the psychology department. And they very quickly reverted to what we might call type. And they became quite, the guards particularly became quite brutal. And some of you may know that there's a reenactment of this experiment downstairs currently shown. These are characteristics which were transferred effortlessly to the famous experiments of Stanley Milgram and Philip Zimbardo. And later still, these modalities provide the structure and were transferred wholesale, along with the teams of psychologist advisors, to the inheritor of the behavioural psychology experiment, the reality TV show. This is a version of the Stanford prison experiment from 2002. It was made by the BBC, and it was called The Experiment, I believe, in which real people were put into exactly the same situation. But there were slightly different modalities in order that the excesses of Zimbardo's experiment were not repeated. But essentially it's a similar thing. I would argue that that Bentham's notion of the Panopticon as a proto-behavioural laboratory brings together a number of ideas that were waiting for their experiment. Ideas that would become axiomatic in the 20th century positive scientific understanding of itself. That social reality, and reality per se, is constructed. That society creates, forms and reforms the subject. That the reformed subject would increase efficiency and utility within society, achieving the greatest good for the greatest number on the one hand and giving maximum economic performance on the other, and that the subject has no innate characteristics. Bentham also provided the prototype for a cybernetic view of society, and this is a topic I will open up in a few minutes. The education of Bentham's hypothetical children, in which radically different systems could be taught, resembles a programme in two respects. In common parlance, an educational programme. but also as a program of computation in which the children receive information and exchange information with other program subjects. Benson's children can be understood as information machines operating within an information network. The shared knowledge they produce and reproduce depends on the data put into the machine. The moon is made of cheese. 2 and 2 equal 5. In line with cybernetic thinking, Benson's social studio is an information ecology. It is the feedback between the individual parts of the system within the social studio that maintain the system. This is a picture of a starting picture, actually, of Norbert Wiener. And he's not actually doing anything evil, as it may look like an evil scientist. He's got a machine there which is transferring sound, as in the people speaking, into tactile symbols which he can read through his fingers. This is to enable people who are deaf to hear through their fingers, so to speak. Now, Norbert Wiener coined the term cybernetics and is the author of Cybernetics, or Control and Communication in Animal and Machine, from 1948. Wiener joined MIT in 1919 and was one of the founders, along with Vannevar Bush, of the Radiation Lab, or RAD Lab, at MIT. And this is the forerunner of MIT's famous Media Lab. From 1940, and with a staff of over 3,000 researchers from across a number of disciplines, the RAD Lab developed a number of military projects, including semi-automated ground environment, an anti-aircraft system, and the Atlas and Polaris missile system. What is remarkable about RAD Lab, particularly in relation to our subject, the social studio, is the manner in which this research was conducted. The RAD Lab encouraged a non-hierarchical management style, an epistemological trading zone in which knowledge across disciplines as varied as chemistry, mathematics and physics was exchanged. The RAD Lab became the model for interdisciplinary research. So interdisciplinary research projects in academic institutions, and later in institutions like this one, and projects like the one Michael and I and Rod are engaged in today. This notion of the non-hierarchical research environment was itself a cybernetic model. Wiener believed that biological, mechanical and information systems, along with the emerging digital computers, could be analogous to each other. All control themselves by sending and receiving messages, and metaphorically at least, all are simple patterns of ordered information in a world otherwise tending toward entropy and noise. The cross-exchange of information which maintains the integrity of the system is called feedback. Although there have been any number of feedback mechanisms throughout history, maintained Wiener, it is the unit which can alter its behaviour in relation to the information it receives, the servo mechanism, that can exhibit behaviour, in the sense that, although amending its behaviour in relation to others, it can demonstrate purpose. The thermos device, mainly the heating system, is a servo mechanism because it changes temperature, it reacts to the environment, and it actually changes the whole environment. So that is an example of a servo mechanism. The thermos device on your central heating system, for instance, does not have a consciousness, but you can describe the thing it does, changing the temperature in your house, as behaviour. The MIT lab was both the analogy and the working out of the cybernetic worldview and the cybernetic model first experimented with in the RAD lab, which spread via the academy into government planning and into the culture as a whole. For instance, Marshall McLuhan's idea of a global village and the axiom, the medium is the message, are based very closely on readings of Wiener and Gregory Bateson, and all three were to become elder statesmen in experiments and alternatives to the system. By the early 1950s, these decentered systems, these decentralized, system-oriented forms of thought were being played out in real time as artistic experiments at Black Mountain College in North Carolina by John Cage, Robert Rauschenberg and their students. And there's John Cage, looking a lot like that guy William C. Macy from experiments which Alan Caprow, who had studied with Cage at the New School of Social Research, Caprow, I beg your pardon, was to christen Happenings in 1958. The Happening is a system in which artists, audience and environment work together to produce a work, shifting the emphasis away from the action of the action painters, for instance, to the artistic production of the social studio, and also transforming the work of art and the modalities of the experiment into the logic of the network. In this Happening, Publicity from 1970, students at Cal Arts built improvised wooden structures in the desert near Cal Arts, while others videotaped them and immediately replayed them for the participants. Like a lot of cybernetically inspired work, it both describes and demonstrates a media ecology. The other elegant example is Hans Hacker's condensation cube from 63-65, is the date? Which creates a system and a model of a system at the same time in a feedback loop. As an aside, many of Caprow's Happenings were recently reenacted at MoCA in 2008. And this is another of Caprow's Happenings, and this is, it's called Household. I think this was in the Van Abbe Museum. They showed a film of this last, was it the Van Abbe Museum? Wherever the, sorry, I can't remember where the, I think you didn't, did you? It was out of such artistic experiments that events like this emerged. This is the TRIPS Festival, and we see the technologies of electronics and LSD as tools to expand human potential, echoing McLuhan's idea that each technological innovation represents an extension of human potential. The Whole Earth Catalogue, and this is the last issue of the Whole Earth Catalogue from 1973, the first was in 1968. This was a resource used by commune members in the 60s, people who had renounced the system in order to conduct their own experiments in their own social studios. This is the Lama Foundation, who are meditating and dancing in what they're going to build, which is a geodesic dome, which is another exciting cybernetically related structure. Buckminster Fuller, who's the architect of these such structures, was another engineer who, like Wiener, Bateson and McLuhan, had a second career as a 60s guru. Here are 2 pages from the first issue of the Whole Earth Catalogue. I'll explain these a little. On one side, we have Norbert Wiener's book on cybernetics being sold. The Whole Earth Catalogue, as I said, was a resource. It was a network thing, actually, because everybody in the the Back to the Land network, who had communes, many of which sprung up in the late 60s, needed a resource in order that they could exchange information prior, of course, to the internet. So we have Norbert Wiener's book, calculated, which is only $4,000 in 1968. And also at the same time, these rather back to the land things like cow skin mats and buckskin things. So it's the idea that these technologies, these tools are used to get back to the land in the context of a network. This is the Lama Foundation's Lama Dome, beautifully named. It was out of the Whole Earth Catalogue and the Whole Earth Network that grew around the publication the Whole Earth Electronic Link, or WELL, which is an early BBS system and the first social networking site, as you could call it, on computers. It opened in 1985. And is one of the first instances in which a community was sold to itself as a community exchanging information with itself. A media ecology, a system as servo mechanism, self-regulating its behaviour through feedback. It is at this point that we see clearly the megalithic mass media that characterised the era of mass production has been replaced for the media of self-performance, in which the commodity of information is the currency. This is the state of the media which Mark Poster calls the Super Panopticon, and Deleuze the controlled society. An economy in which code, or the lack of code, bars us or gives us access to arenas of information, or information economies. It would also seem that the society of the spectacle has given way to a society of self-performance in which surveillance is no less real, but is this time non-scopic forms of surveillance, such as the GPS system, credit card checks, the code of DNA used as a code for identity. And much of the surveillance relies on self-surveillance, and as in the days of Foucault, self-regulation. So back in the social studio, the social experiment feeds back into TV as a reality TV show. And back in the social studio, the experiment feeds back into the movie theatre. This is Das Experiment, Oliver Hirschbergel, 2001, and I beg his pardon for my pronunciation, which was understood by many to be a fictionalized account of what happened in Zimbardo's experiment. And back in the social studio, the experiment feeds back into the gallery. This is Victor Zimniewski, Repetition, 2005. So back in the social studio, Stanley Milgram's Obedience to Authority experiment. That's in the laboratory. In the social studio, the experiment feeds back into a movie theatre as The 10th Level, 1975, director Charles S. Dubin, starring our own favourite William Shatner, and a very young John Travolta. And in the social studio, it feeds back into an artwork, the Milgram Reenactment, 2002-3, Rod Dickinson in collaboration with Graham Edler and Steve Rushton. But even before these gallery-based reenactments, the social psychology experiment within the social studio had already found form in excelsis. The reality TV show in which people are contained in an enclosed space, are given tasks to perform, feed back information to each other, and learn how to behave themselves, is actually the conclusion. So here we all love Big Brother, the UK Television 4 TV show. We all feel like we know these people, but how about making your own version with people you know around you? This image is from Time magazine. It shows the body of a man murdered by drug scams in Colombia. What makes it a very contemporary photograph is that the picture shows a number of other photographers taking a picture of the man's body. And there I'll leave it.